In the higher realms, physicality is also something that is not the way how we perceive it now here. It's much more fluid in that sense. It's sometimes challenging to move or think outside of the 3D perspective, because the higher we go, the more we actually see how much our thoughts and feelings and frequency actually can impact it really quickly. Now in the 3D form, we know that our thoughts impact our reality, or our emotions, feelings impact the frequency, and that creates our reality. In higher realms, it's just in a much more faster way manifested as in this, because we have all our brain that wants to believe what it sees in a way, to accept it as a reality. Seeing certain ways, the way we're used to, it takes a bit of time to change that or transform.
Welcome everybody. Today I have another visionary artist that brings forward beautiful soul portraits and portraits of beings from different universes and depicts them in such detail. Years ago when I was in ceremony, I actually had a vision of myself as this beautiful avatar being in this body. And when I came out of the ceremony, I found this portrait. It just spoke to me on Instagram, and I reached out and I was like, this is it. Jessica, who you get to meet today, is the amazing visionary artist for that work. So welcome, Jessica. I'm so excited to have you here on this podcast. The painting that's behind me is the painting I was just talking about. I remember her name is Liana. She had a special message of the Lion Beings, the Feline Collective. So excited to talk about how that information comes to you, how they show up for you, your process of bringing them forward into an art. How did you step into this work? I'm imagining there was a journey there. It wasn't immediate. And Jessica is in Europe. We on different time zones. So thank you, Jessica, for taking the time to be on Soul Communication.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. First of all, I appreciate it. I'm very honored. How I started with my work: when I just recently moved back to Germany. I was living in South Korea before for 6 years. And then I moved back and I had the opportunity to start new. And I was thinking, in which kind of direction should I go? But on the side, I always felt like I enjoyed doing art, and I wanted to create art connected with spirituality and more in a way that's also empowering for us, even though all kinds of arts are very empowering. And I guess also years before I even started, I had other visionary artists seen online that were, to me, very inspiring and touching. And I just felt very called to share that kind of inspiration as well with other people, because to me, when you look at an art piece and it does something to you, it feels either inspiring or touching, or it's some kind of memory that invokes in you. I feel it's a very beautiful and powerful way to express and share art in that way. Then back in 2019, I just started again drawing on my iPad. And I first of all felt very called to draw animal guides, so animal spirit guides. And that's how I first started drawing animal guides. Mm-hmm. And I connected that with light language because I've been practicing and been learning about it already beforehand for a while, because I've seen it first a couple of years before online. That really spoke to me. So I started doing that when I was still in Korea. And then when I came back, I wanted to combine light language with the animal guides, because I felt that combined can help also invoke certain energies that can be helpful for us and for our evolution and for our growth. So yeah, that's how I first started. And initially I was just thinking to do it as a way to just share. I wasn't really thinking that I'm going to be doing that a lot later, but just here and there. Mm-hmm. My very first spirit animal was a black panther, which is my spirit animal, which, yeah, I felt very drawn to. And I started sharing that online, and people had like very positive feedback to it. So of course that was very encouraging. And that's how I continued. And then people suddenly asked me if I could draw their spirit animal. And that's where I felt maybe I should put more focus into it. Maybe I should put more time into it. And so I started taking commissions for their spirit animal guides and totem animals. I've done that for a while, and then I felt called to draw other light beings that I felt wanted to be expressed. And then I started to do more.
When someone reaches out today, even and asking you to paint their soul portrait or their spirit animal, what's your typical process? I know with me, you asked, even with Liana in the background, I remember you customized the code for me, but you
Yes.
did ask for my picture. So I'm imagining that you read in the signature of the frequency that you're trying to resonate with and integrate into the painting.
Yeah, correct. I have the picture always nearby, or it's because it's digital art, it's always like in the Canva of where I draw. And so I have the energy there. And of course, I set the intention for the highest good and what's best for you in your current time, because there are so many different timelines that we could go to. And so it's always very important to be very clear on that, because otherwise it can just confuse you instead of actually helping you. And so it's very important that the intentions are set very clear and connected with the higher self, of course. The higher self is always there knowing what's best for you. And so that's always present. And then, of course, also source energy, the energy of which we have our life force, basically, which is also always present. And so with these intentions, I then just start creating. I don't try to visualize too much, because sometimes that can be a hindrance. And so I just start the process and see and allow what comes through to me.
Beautiful. And so you merging yourself with the energy, and the energy starts talking to you and how it wants to be expressed as well.
The way how I always work is I don't want to have my energy interfering with it, because I'm just more of a conduit. Like I just create what I perceive, and I try to always put my energy out of that so that I don't influence it in any way, and so that I just let the person's energy come through the picture and their higher self. Of course, I feel very guided by their higher self communicating in their way to me. It's not through words, it's like a knowing. You just know how it's done in a way. And that's many people always ask, like when it comes to finding what they want to do or their passion or whatever it is. And many people who are very successful what they do, they just know how to do it. It's like an inner knowing, or they know what their passion is, or whatever skill they have. They develop it, but it's connected with this inner knowing.
Have you always had this inner knowing? Was this part of your spiritual journey that you started trusting it more, especially as a visionary artist, to listen, to hear, and then express it forward? It takes a lot of courage and confidence and trust in that information.
That's a very important point that you're saying here. It's very much connected to trusting yourself. And we all often, I would assume, struggle with the fact that we don't trust ourselves enough. And to really know that inner knowing and feeling it really takes practice in practicing trusting yourself. And it's definitely a process. And oftentimes, I remember when I first started, I had to really connect deeply with myself to, first of all, know what my knowing is, and to trust also my intentions and what I want out of it. And with time, I could hone it more and more, but it's always a process of trusting yourself and trusting what even knowing means to you, because it can be different for everyone. And everybody has their ideas of how things are. We all have our own filter. And so going through all of that is definitely also a process. And I think it will always be a certain process. But I guess for me, the journey to always ask myself again, what do I really align with? What is my truth? And all of it, to always like check on it again in order to hone that knowing inside in which direction you're going. And it's not always easy. I've had my challenges 100%. And I think it's a lifelong practice for me, at least.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Talk to me a little more about the Oracle deck, how that project started, because I'm super excited for it to come out at some point. I know I'm in it and I have a very beautiful purple hair. And so that's the process of you converting and communicating with the soul and understanding how it can be portrayed. What motivated you to see, because I think it's 44 cards, right? What motivated you? What inspiration came up that this can be a project of soul portraits that could be turned into a deck? Like, just walk me through it more.
Yeah, I had this idea while I was brainstorming with a friend, and I was thinking for a while to create a oracle deck. Many people have asked me also if I am creating one. And I felt there's so many beautiful decks out there, and it's always nice to get a new deck. And I felt like I wanted to do something that is a bit different and that empowers the people in a way more. It's wonderful. We have guides and spirits that support our journey, but I feel that we put sometimes too much trust and we give our power too much away, and that it inhibits us sometimes to make our own decisions. And again, going back to the inner knowing, because we have put too much trust on either other people and all of that, which is, of course, in a way easier because we don't take full or subconsciously maybe don't take full responsibility if it doesn't fully work out for us. But turning more within us and knowing that we have all that we need, I think it's a very important point, at least it is to me. And so I felt creating soul portraits, because when I create a soul portrait, there are, of course, many different dimensions of a person, many different past lives, many different levels energetically. And so my focus for this soul portrait card deck is for each one that wanted to be part of it, to create that kind of soul portrait version of themselves that will fit together for the collective and as a collective together with the other 43 individuals. And that will basically help and guide people that want to use it in a way, but also understanding that each soul, each person has very important wisdom and lessons that they can share with others, which can serve as an inspiration, as a guidance as well. And so we can derive guidance from other souls and soul portraits, basically, but also knowing that we have that power and that knowledge also within us. It's like, for me, intentionally, like also a reminder that others can help and support and inspire us. That's important, of course, and we are collective social beings that we need each other in a way, but also knowing that we can also find that within us and we have all of it within us. And by trusting that and owning that and cultivating that inner knowing, we have all that we need. My focus was basically to empower individuals, anyone that wants to share that aspect of themselves in the deck, and anyone that, of course, in the future wants to use it. And yeah, so I'm excited, still working on it. It's been taking a lot longer than expected, and I'm also very happy to have you part of it.
This was like a year ago, so I remember you painted me. So yeah, I thought you would be done by this point, but I understand these projects sometimes. But I realize these projects sometimes take much. They're multidimensional, right? So they have their own timeline.
Yes, and it's also interesting because I would like to be much faster in the process of it, but I also have to always check myself, and I'm not always in the best alignment, and so I don't feel it doesn't come through well enough for me. And so but I have to usually wait until I'm in a good alignment so I can create it. And so with art, especially when it's connected with other souls, for me, I want to be very mindful about it. Therefore, it doesn't come through always. Sometimes when energies are so intense, I just have to wait a little bit. And I had the process of a lot of frustration that it's not going so fast. And I had to, at some point, just let it go and just trust that it's going to come in the right time. The people that are part of it will also goes all in the right timing. And I have also 3 more spots left, I think. And I know that the right people will also come joining when the time is right at the end, and it's all gonna work out.
Like you said, a collective project, there's a certain resonance and frequency. And I
Yeah.
remember for me, it was a clear yes to
Mm-hmm.
be part of it. And I know my dear friend Marian Savina is in it as well. And there's a certain level of high priestesses that have been attracted to be in your project. Do you feel there's some sort of web of connection that brings us certain souls to say yes to what you want to bring into the
Yes.
world?
I believe so, because it's interesting how the people are coming together, and also throughout the process, how things also shift for the people. I do believe that, especially because the messages, I want them to be all, of course, rounded and all fitting together as a whole. And going through that process also, I really see and believe that it's all somehow fits perfectly together. And at the end, when I'm done with the last card, I will also again go through all the messages and finish them in much more detail, and making sure that it, yeah, all aligns together.
So the messages, each card had a message. I don't even remember my message yet, but how did that message come up for you? Like, how did you know this is what represents this particular soul, or how it fits in the deck? What?
Yeah, many different ways. Like sometimes while creating it, I can strongly feel a certain theme of what comes through. Sometimes when I'm done with it, I would get certain impressions from outside that kind of inspires me in a way where again the inner knowing comes and where I feel, okay, this is what it's supposed to be. Sometimes I also ask cards if it's not so clear. Then I also see how it's supposed to come together. So I use many different ways, try to be like open as possible to let source, universe, the soul inspire me through all different channels, basically. And I'm trying to be open for it. Sometimes again, we have like our own filters and our own like way of thinking.
Yeah.
And so just being open for this interesting process.
I think my card might be inner knowing. I don't know if you remember, but I'm
Oh,
feeling like this conversation about inner knowing is really resonating. I
mhm.
do also want to ask you about the galactic beings like Liana herself, and I know the other beings that you portrayed so beautifully. Because we talked about soul portrait, that's a specific person, and you read in them. How these beings come into you, these light beings? They interact into
Yeah.
dreams.
Yeah. I just checked what your like title of your message is. It's inner calling,
The
inner knowing.
callings.
Yes.
Yes, in and out. I can't remember there was
Yes.
something along the line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's to listen to your inner voice, to your calling. So much
Mhm.
wisdom and knowledge. Yeah. So that's very synchronistic, I would say. To your question with the other guides, you said, right?
How do they come
Mhm.
to you? How do you see them? Like, how did you have, for me, I'm curious to know, like, how, for
Yes.
instance, Liana came to you, Lyran beings being depicted on all kinds of ways, and often they very, like, lion focused. But this is when I remember seeing her, and it was just it was the closest depiction of how I saw myself in that avatar body and why it
Mhm.
resonated so deeply with me. So I'm curious about how they come to you and you get visions of them.
Yeah, it's a very similar process in the sense of sometimes I'm not sure what I'm going to be creating and I just start the process. And then with time, I get messages or I understand what or how it's supposed to turn out. And through the process, then I feel the impulses sometimes of certain details that need to be there. And it's also
Mm,
just doing it until I feel like this is right. So I keep
mm,
drawing and drawing and until I get to the point of this is correct. This is how it's supposed to be. It feels in alignment. It feels good. And I can tell by just the way how, when I look at it, how it makes me feel or whether I feel satisfied with it or not, then I can go by that guidance, inner knowing of, yeah, of whether I should continue or not. And it's also similarly with the message through the process, sometimes feel or know what it's about. Sometimes when I want to go to sleep, I suddenly know what that's about. It's oftentimes, of course, before falling asleep or when waking up, the mind, the subconscious is just much more present. And then I feel more open to receiving all of it. So through these processes, I learned and honed, and that's how I then did it, basically.
have you ever tried any type of psychedelics and been to these spaces
No,
maybe through these journeys?
I've
Interesting.
never
It's,
tried, but some people have suggested me to try it because that might
mm,
expand my way of expression. And I have mixed
mm,
feelings about it. So for some reason, I feel it's not calling me. There was a period of time where I was interested in trying ayahuasca with the right surrounding and the right guide and all of it. I might try it in the future, but right now it's never pulled me that strong to do it. Have you tried it?
oh, a lot.
Yeah.
I went through a whole journey with them
Yeah.
and not so much anymore. Actually,
Mhm.
I'm coming more and more into a place of where you are, where we are the technology and the
Yeah.
visions are much more organic without necessarily going into those
Mm.
spaces. But I have during COVID facilitated many mushroom ceremonies,
Mhm.
working with mushroom medicine and cacao,
Mhm.
and being a shaman in these smaller circles. It's just
Mhm.
in that specific journey, I was in the forest and it was like a
Mhm.
cave, but it wasn't here. It was
Mhm.
in the Lyran planet that I was
Yeah.
from. It was me running through these kind of jungle foresty type of environment, but in that body, very tall, about 9 foot, like in the movie Avatar, but a
Mhm.
little different in that similar type of body, and very used to the ability to just be one with the nature and really read and sense like nature. Like I was running, but I was with it. I was part of that jungle, or it
Mhm.
wasn't even as jungly as an Avatar. There was definitely more waterfalls and rocks
Yeah.
formation. In some way, you can say it was similar to Avatar, how James Cameron pictured it, because
Mhm.
it's gorgeous what he did with it.
Yes.
From what I hear, he did actually get it through Dreamtime. I feel every visionary artist is receiving information from their
Mm.
subconscious self. So
Mhm.
he didn't just pull it from the ether. It was, I think, from his own connection probably to those spaces as
Mhm.
well. It's the DMT, all these molecules that we connect to. We already have them in our chemistry. It just enhances it. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
visions just can be deeper and more enhanced. And mushroom medicine definitely very cartoonish in some ways. So there's a lot
Mhm.
of that like very visionary, cartoony kind of information you can receive if those are the spaces you're going into. There's a place for it for expanding our consciousness. I am very open to them. I went through the journey of ayahuasca and I no longer take ayahuasca, but I am grateful for that
Mhm.
journey. I did
Mhm.
a lot of these journeys in the jungles in South America, so that was very
Wow.
special to connect to nature as
Yeah.
well. We really need to listen, the in and
Mhm.
out, in the calling. I feel the themes of our talk today is to really know if this is what you need in this journey right now. For me, it was needed at the time and then evolved beyond it. And actually, the grandmother medicine told me that I was completed with it, that I understood the earthly shamanic connection, and I need to understand galactic. And I didn't fully at the time realize what galactic means. Now I do.
Mm-hmm.
Now with the light language and everything that opened up, I feel mushroom medicine is more in resonance with me. If I continue doing anything, it's mostly with that medicine, the spores, and they're very multidimensional as well. And so I become one with the mycelium network, and it's much more galactic for me. But again, we have all the information, we have all the codes, we carry all of it in a soul signature. And these days, I facilitate these sound healing Kundalini activation workshops with cacao medicine. Cacao is very gentle. I don't think it's more heart opening than psychedelic. In these experiences, people have incredible galactic journeys without anything really. Breathwork and Kundalini activation, just being one with Shakti and being one with all. And I love that you talked about the details. These details, I feel everyone brings it in a little differently in my own visions. We do know that lion beings have the hybridized version of lion beings have these pointy ears and just Elvin, there's just some connections to them. I think I also loved your Andromedan and Arcturian paintings too. All of yours really resonate. That's how I've seen them in my visions too.
Wonderful.
So I appreciate the details. The details are really nice.
Nice. Wonderful. I'm glad to hear it. And it's always great to hear that confirmation, of course, that helps to bounce each other off in a sense of confirming that what we see is similar or what we feel. So that's very helpful, of course. And I'm glad that so many people can resonate with that or see a part of themselves in it. That's, I think, for every artist, always wonderful to hear.
I remember when I reached out to you, and then this painting has been with me for the last 3 years or so through COVID, and it's just really allowed me to step into myself, into my higher self. At the time, I was still like playing with my name, but I think Liana Diana, I really stepped into Diana at the time and into my phoenix self, and just even something about her like holding this light and like this playfulness of the energies, but knowing is just one aspect, of course, but it's one aspect that I'm closest to or remembering the most. No, and then we've traveled through this galaxy and other universes before in different forms or non-forms that you can't always even depict in colors. But the ones in the form are the ones the closest, and it gives you that multidimensional perspective.
Yeah, because we have so many different perspectives and sides to us, and so many different ways of expressing, and it's just beautiful to see it in all these different forms. And of course, depending where we are in our lives, other forms, other perspectives are more relevant than other parts of our lives, and we see it as a evolution, but also just growth and learning. And so it's very interesting to see it grow and evolve, the way how people connect with it and who connects with which image when. It's always, partially there is the time where many do it at the same time, and then where some do it later or earlier and all that. So it's very interesting to me to observe that.
When you're working on someone's soul portrait, do you ever get like Akashic reading? Like you starting getting all this information on about the soul?
Yes, but I try to keep it, because that might confuse me too a little bit on what the main message is supposed to be if I get too much information. And especially now for the card deck, I try again to be very intentional to what should come through, and everything else to just not come through, because it's otherwise too much in a way for me to then put that in art in order so that it fits with everything else. And there could be so many different versions of a soul coming through. And so I try to put that in check so that I have let's say, one kind of vision ahead of me to go towards. Otherwise, it can be very confusing. And again, if I'm not careful, let's say, or if I'm not very intentional, there can be so many different layers coming through, past, present, future. It's like all mixed up. And so it's very important that I'm very intentional.
For
If
sure.
that
The
makes sense.
intention really matters. And I think what you were saying, like the container that you're setting up for the information that you want to express really matters. So it's as pure as it can be. There's always distortion. Just being here
Yes.
in this reality, we already distorted. There's no real time, right? Past, future. It's all like this
Yes,
variant of ourselves, right? Because the idea
exactly.
of seeing ourselves as variant of ourselves and there's parallel realities too. So which one does it come through in this moment? I remember my reaction when you painted me with purple hair.
Mhm.
Initially, it was very hard for me to accept. I was like,
I
why
know.
purple? That's
Yes,
not
yes.
me. And then I remember first you painted my eyes pink, and I was like, no, I need more of me, more green eyes. In hindsight, we're so used to a certain way of how we think we are or how we perceive ourselves. And maybe there is this completely different aspect of ourselves that we're not even seeing that someone else is able to pick up. So the
Yeah.
ego definitely has a bit of a conflict. Is this really me? Who is this being?
Yes, I think that's an important point also that you're pointing out here. I've had a couple of people that for some, it's interesting. Some people saw a lot of synchronicity and they could really connect with it. And then some people had their own idea of how it's supposed to look like. And they were all just great at the way how they shared it, because of course I want everyone to be happy with what they get and on a level to be satisfied in that sense. And of course, I also listen. And sometimes what comes up is not always comfortable because it shows different aspects of, as you said, we don't maybe recognize or see in us. And purple, for example, purple pink is a very highly spiritual color. It's very in the spiritual realm. And so I saw in you that strong spiritual connection that you also do in your work. And I could just tell by your energy. And that's an important aspect that I felt should be pointed out in you. But then again, like we have our own way of how we perceive ourselves and how we sometimes also want to just express ourselves. And again, our own filters and our own ego is also like coming through. It's also for me as an artist sometimes challenging because I want to be sure that the person likes it and can connect with it. And on the other side, staying true to what I perceived or what I see. And yeah, it's a balance there for sure that I try to keep.
And I'm grateful for that.
Mm.
The balance matters, and I think
Yes.
it's good to also be uncomfortable in maybe how we think things should be. And I appreciate the purple as I start sinking into it. I actually was loving it. I was like, oh yeah, I get that. And I think it
Mhm.
somewhat also has to do with the aura, because then I remember there was a lot of pinks and purples
Mhm.
in my aura reading photography.
Yeah.
And I know pinks and purples are very much also like part of a bit of like the Lyran frequency. We have
Mhm.
pinks and purples. So then I was like, as I sat with it, I was like, oh yeah, this is actually funky and just out of your norm. But I feel like we, at least the Lyrans, we really played with mutation a lot from my
Mhm.
memories. Like we
Mhm.
mutated aspects, and a mutation initially was not accepted, but then as we started hybridizing, it was actually like a cool thing to be
Mhm.
mutated. And it's almost like an X-Men have a version that it's different from you that makes you unique, and whether it's the hair or something else, and constantly playing with aspects of ourselves, it's important to give ourselves permissions to play and change our looks and put
Yes.
different outfits on and just try different versions of ourselves. Like I know
Yeah.
I've done a lot of it, just being someone who goes to Burning Man and
Mhm.
pushing my boundary of comfort and learning through the practice to be less less comfortable in more comfortable in knowing less about myself and just like
Mhm.
pushing those edges a little more.
Mhm.
So that's an invitation. Yes. And so I think
Yeah.
your art also brings that
Mhm.
invitation forward.
Yeah, and also in the higher realms, physicality is also something that is not the way how we perceive it now here.
Mm,
It's much more fluid in that sense. And so for me, it's sometimes challenging to move or think outside of the 3D perspective, because the higher we go, the more we actually see how much our thoughts and feelings and frequency actually can impact it really quickly. Now in the 3D form, we know that our thoughts impact our reality, or our emotions, feelings impact the frequency, and that creates our reality. And in higher realms, it's just in a much more faster way manifested as in this, because we have all our, let's say, brain that kind of wants to believe what it sees in a way, to accept it as a reality. But it's, yeah, it's what we, of course, truly feel and believe is what creates our reality. And so seeing certain ways the way we're used to is sometimes takes a bit time to kind of change that or transform that in a way.
for
Yeah.
sure. And it's like you said, it's much more fluid. When I perceive like an Arcturian being, it almost feels to me in form and non-form at the same time, like shape shift in and
Mm.
out. I started connecting to Mantis Being Collective recently. Brought someone on podcast, Tony. He's very connected to Antares.
Mm-hmm.
And so they start communicating with me, and they also very much in non-form kind of insectoid beings, but
Mm-hmm.
they manifest themselves in the form, and there's different like dimensional levels of them. So sometimes they're small, sometimes they're really large, and
Yeah.
something in between. And I feel with all these galactic beings, mishmash sometimes, depending on which dimension you even
Mm-hmm.
perceive. Or, as you said, can be confusing from one perspective, and another perspective it's like fascinating because you're like,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, like this is just so many. It's constantly shapeshifting.
Yeah, definitely. Also very much dependent from where you stand when you perceive and see, let's say, where your understanding goes, and again, where your filters are. That's the way how we then interpret them. If we are not conscious enough to see what our bias is. And of course, it plays a huge role of how we grew up, with what kind of beliefs and conditionings we grew up with. That also impacts the way how we perceive. And so it's a practice to open up to a more neutral ground, non-judgmental as much as
Mm,
possible, in order to perceive what wants to come through from a neutral perspective, and therefore feeling and listening into it, and being open to what wants to come through. Because there is, of course, a lot of confirmation bias, for in a way, if we're not careful enough. Like, we believe that, and so we want to see that, and that's what's, of course, going to come through in a way. But again, that's also where an anointing comes again in place, to filter through and really feel, okay, what's truly in alignment, what's really, or what feels true to me, and then listening from that perspective of what wants to come through.
the codes themselves, the light codes that
Yeah.
you put on your paintings, and you have sometimes sacred geometry, very portally type of geometry that comes with the light code. Why sometimes specific geometry comes in,
Mm-hmm.
or how do you perceive it? I know for me, sometimes I actually speak the light language while I
Mm-hmm.
write or paint. Is that your process at all, or curious how
Um,
that works for you?
yeah, for me, it's mainly through just writing and creating. And it's also very similar to the art. Sometimes I do see it somehow, and I try to do it that way. And sometimes I just start, and again, it's, this feels right. This feels energetically good. And so then I create it in that way, connecting it with the light language of writing it, and letting it come through in a way that feels right to me, and it feels good to me, and in alignment with what the intention, of course, is. Because what the intention is for the image, that's of course what the light language codes are going to be there to support, basically. And yeah,
Yeah.
again, it's a very
Important.
intuitive. Yes.
I feel like it
Yes.
amplifies what you're trying to
Mhm.
portray.
Yeah, correct. And also that process is very intuitive, because I feel if I put too much of my thinking, my brain into it, it can be very limiting in a sense of what the brain sometimes is used to thinking and used to imagining. So I try to be less rational about it so I can let everything else come through better.
Beautiful. And as we're going to be wrapping up, what would you recommend someone? First of all, I think anyone should get a soul portrait from Jessica because it's a cool process. But what kind of advice would you give someone who's listening to this podcast, maybe to do with visionary art or
Mhm.
connecting to light language?
I think it's really about practicing trusting yourself, practicing really asking yourself what is truly your alignment, what feels in your alignment true to you, and then really owning that inner trust, because by practicing that, you will know your inner knowing, you will know what feels good to you, because you could do something that might seem good, but if you're not really connected with yourself, it's hard then to trust it. And really practice. There are so many different ways where you can learn to practice inner confidence, inner knowing, which is connected to love, of course, loving yourself, accepting yourself, because if you don't fully accept yourself, it's hard to trust yourself. And I think really owning that, because one can be super spiritual in knowing everything that you need to know about spirituality, but if you don't love and trust yourself, then the core of all its teachings won't really help you to really embody what you want to embody, because it starts with yourself. And of course, for me, source, God, however you want to call it, is the main connection that we all have. And yeah, just nurturing that connection.
Beautifully said. How would someone can find you information? What's your website and
Yeah.
Instagram?
My website is lightbeingcodes.com, and my Instagram is light underscore being underscore codes. And just as a side note, there are many, as the past couple of years, there are many fraud accounts on Instagram that pretend to be me and messaging people about readings. It's not me. I only have one page. And yeah, just being aware of that, because I think many people fell, unfortunately, for that, or were confused by it.
Yeah, good point. Light underscore beings underscore codes, bringing us to wrap in this theme about when it doesn't resonate. If the message someone sends you is a little off, then
Yes.
maybe there's some fake agenda behind that, or just in
Mhm.
general, what feels right. I think you said that's how you really know if it matches you and your vibration. I'm really looking forward, Jessica, to the Oracle
Yes.
deck coming out. Any other projects for you after Oracle decks come out? I know you had a book at some point, didn't you?
Yeah, I have two smaller books that I published, one with spirit animals, one with light beings. But in terms
Mhm.
of other projects, I am not so sure yet. I'm currently doing a whole like coaching training for singles and relationship coaching. So I also want to work as a
Oh,
coach in the future. And so a lot of my focus is there. But I think after the project, I let myself be inspired to what my next project will be.
I know Soul Portrait is part of the Oracle deck. Do you also do custom portraits for people as well? And that's something they can order on the website?
Yeah, when I have sometimes an extra slot, I would offer, or I have always people asking me about it. So I would go back to them and just tell them that I'm able to do one image, one soul portrait for them. So they can just subscribe to my website, and then they will be emailed out sometimes offers that I open some slots up. So yeah, like that would be great.
To check out Jessica's work. It's amazing. And I love how sometimes you animate the paintings too. So when they open their eyes, it becomes very real.
Yes, yes.
Yes, for being creative with that. Thank you so much, Jessica, for taking the time. And
Thank you for
thank you,
having
everyone,
me.
for tuning into the episode. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to see our other episodes and don't forget to subscribe.